Okay, welcome back. So now we're going to our second, there are only going to be two parts. And I said it wasn't going to be as long as the other one, but I really don't think it will be. So let's talk about the setting. First of all, I guess I put settings. Do you have anything to say overall? Because I know once we get to the four house lords, I talk about those settings. But this was something that enticed you to the game initially, really was the setting. So what was it about the European setting that yeah.
I mean, it's not something that I've seen a lot. I mean, I think you have this sort of gothic Victorian vibe in Bloodborne, and in this case, it's more of a pastiche. Like especially Castle Demascreed, it's more actually like I think like American in some regards, like her big floppy hat.
Yeah.
But it's just I don't know. It was cool. It's not like a spaceship or a tropical island. It was different, and I think it was a cool departure to have more sort of fantasy horror elements in the mix, and to the general locations themselves. Like here we have the Great Hall, or one of the Great Halls of Castle D, and there's just something very unsettling about the design of these structures and just being inside them and sort of knowing that there's danger beyond every wall. It kind of reminds me of like those prank videos from like the days of E-Bombs worlds where you would be looking at something and somebody would tell you to look for a detail, and all of a sudden this horrifying ghoul face would pop out and you'd fall out of your chair. It has that kind of energy where you just, you're driving towards poking around and unlocking things, but that only brings you closer to the horror.
Yeah. And this, I think there are certain ones like oh, let's see if the factory, for instance. I think you can expect, just because it's so dark, that something's going to happen to you. But with the castle, I feel like almost its beauty makes it seem slightly non-threatening, like, oh, this is so pleasant, nothing bad could happen. But that's the danger, that certainly it draws you in, really, and that makes you, I think, more vulnerable. But yeah, I really liked it. I liked the village. It's interesting. A lot of the juxtapositions, I guess, are just how the village compares to the castle to the factory, the dam or the quarry or whatever that place was, to all these. So it's like really distinct areas, but they somehow all work together, which I think is really interesting. And yeah, I think we probably talked about it before. Just it's a distinct setting, and it feels like it's almost at a time as well.
Yeah.
And so that, and with the Resident Evil games that I've been playing, there's inevitably a lab that you'll be in, and there's a police station in the city. So it's a departure, at least for me, who's, I'm not going to consider myself a veteran player. I'd say I'm like maybe a step above rookie, but so it was nice to have that difference there, which I guess, props to 7, having the bayou, that's completely different too. And this
Right.
kind of haunted house-esque, which would go back to Resident Evil 1. So
Yeah. Yeah. The castle is very mansion-like, of course. And so
yes,
that's very classical.
absolutely. Okay, well, we'll get more into some of these settings once we talk about them. I want to talk about some specific characters. So the Duke, we'll start with him. You said you liked this guy.
I kind of like him because there's something funny about him, and it's not his appearance, it's his literal appearance, that he just sort of appears everywhere sort of out of random, like when he pops up in Castle Demascreed, it's like what are the rules here? Because like how are you, because when you go into that room, like they won't follow you in there. At least I don't think so. And so he's just like he's kind of one of these, you assume, sort of the gods of the village, where he's very powerful, but he just seems to be really interested in selling you things, which is sort of functional in the gameplay, but that's just what his dialogue is about. Sometimes it gives you riddles, And sometimes he just comments on, he's like, "Ooh, I saw your eye on that," or whatever item. Like I don't know. I found it funny.
Yeah, he has humor. He's intriguing because he knows a lot.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's got to be a reason. It's not just, hey, he's providing exposition for us. But I felt like, oh man, are you somehow like involved? Are you a lord? Or, are you, I don't know. I just feel like he's got some sort of backstory. And yeah, they don't follow you in that room. I can promise you, because I had run away from Lady D several times and went in there. But if you look around him, just the accoutrement, like he's got onions or garlic hanging down, and he pops up in bizarre places. But it's almost like either he's really protected because he knows what he's doing, or does he have an agreement with some of these people that he can hang out here and he's like sacrosanct and he's not going to get touched. Like he's just a really intriguing character. There's such mystery around him that I'd love to know more. And he has some fun comments. If I hope you continue playing, but if you can hunt pigs, chickens, and fish, and then there are certain recipes that he will make, and it increases your health and blocking abilities. And he eats what you eat. So it's really interesting that he's making this meal for you, presumably, but he makes both enough for both of you. It's like, oh, this is good, which totally makes sense. And there's one line, which I wouldn't know unless I had watched videos, but he sometimes says, "What are you buying?" That's just something an old friend of mine used to say. And that's what the merchant used to say in Resident Evil 4. So there are fun things. And even when he's working on your guns, he'll say like, "My fingers are more dexterous than you might think." So he has nice little cues. I mean, they repeat, so it's not, I've heard them a couple times. So it's not endless, but I feel like he's a fleshed out NPC that otherwise would just be like, I'm going to buy stuff, a sell, like you mentioned Assassin's Creed Odyssey, those sellers, you just sell. There's no really interaction between you besides the start and finishing conversation. But this guy seems to be like a pretty fleshed out character.
Yeah, and it doesn't even seem like they had to go that far and be creative. So I appreciate that because he's sort of tertiary to the story. But I'm glad you mentioned the merchant from RE4 because that is, it's almost like he created this like precedent that or lineage that you have to make a really whacked out merchant. Although they didn't in Resident Evil 5, he was just at the end of the level they would just have a screen where you could buy things, which was sad, but. That original merchant was such a source of classic internet humor. The "what are you buying? What are you selling? I don't buy it at a high price." That, like, if anybody's seen the Ultra 64 or Mega 64 video where they just have a guy dressed up like that and he's just going around and people asking, "What are you buying?" That's pretty funny.
Oh boy. I'll have to look that up. I hope, since it seems like there's going to be a third, but it'll just be following Rose, that this guy pops up again and he's got that tie in there and says, I mean, I guess he'd be 20 years older. You think he'll be okay? He's not going to have like a bypass surgery. I don't know.
I know.
But just have that connection and see what that would be like. That'd be fun.
Yeah. I'd like to see him again.
Yeah. Okay. The next character, I kind of feel like she's minor compared to like the other, even though her specter is like all over the game, but you only encounter her for a very brief period of time. But we have Mother Miranda. So thoughts on what you've seen of her. And then I also thought about right before we started recording that this is the second game with a lead / climactic female antagonist, because Evelyn was the main antagonist in RE7. So is there any thought about like, is that progressive that, hey, we've got these these female antagonists in this particular duology, whereas maybe it was all male driven, which is true, I guess, Mr. X and Nemesis and all that stuff. So thoughts on her, and then is there anything we can applaud Capcom for?
Mega Man was pretty good. No, that one's for you, Donovan. I'll give Miranda a meh because I think she's kind of a cliche. Like I gotta resurrect. I mean, she's basically like Imhotep from The Mummy.
Oh.
Um, but it's just weird because like that could be fine,
Mm-hmm.
but this is a game full of character. So to have the final, like the ultimate bad guy, be sort of just like, oh, I gotta save my daughter. Like, oh, geez, never heard that one before. And that sort of goes right into the, I don't know, fatherhood versus motherhood. Like,
Hmm.
who deserves the child? This is a misandry parable.
Wow. Yeah.
I think about child custody, which really favors the mother, I think, and that's unfair. But I don't know. She seems fine. I personally like I've talked about female villains on our own show a fair bit more than is necessary, I'd say, Q&A. But I'm mostly fine with lady villains, but I don't get excited in the same way. Like I don't find them quote unquote empowering. That's not how they interest me. So like I was never really into Harley Quinn, for example. I like that. I appreciate that she's sort of anarchy, but she's never really gonna win in the end unless
Hmm.
it's her own story. And so Miranda is like, yeah, she's very powerful, but Ethan got the better of her. This kid from Brooklyn or wherever he's from.
Yeah. I don't even know what his backstory. I don't even care. Yeah,
Mm,
her character design is pretty cool. In comparison to Evelyn, for instance, I would say that she's cooler looking than Evelyn, but you're right that it's almost well-trod territory because the shape-shifting thing, I
yep.
feel like, Evelyn was doing that in RE7, and I knew that they call her the hag, but that old woman in the village, I was like, there's no way that this woman, that's got to be Mother Miranda.
Wow.
And yeah, so I just thought, is this, what makes her distinct as a villain?
Right.
And I potentially her relationship with the Megamycete and Oswell, so she was a scientist even way back when. So she's really the creator, or not really the creator, but it's almost like the origin point of Umbrella and the Resident Evil series. So that was intriguing. But I agree that other than that, I mean, you just hear about her constantly. So it seems like she's huge, but it's just the other people and what are their relationships with her. And you find out Heisenberg is really resentful of what he did, of what she did to the village. And the villagers have different opinions that, oh, she protects them, but also she's experimenting on them. Moreau's a bit of a sycophant. Can't really tell about Beneviento and what her thoughts are. And then Lady D, I think she appreciates her, but also she could totally she gets upset and frustrated with her as well. So it's more interesting other characters' reactions and relationship with her than the character herself.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Much like Ethan. Parallels.
Oh boy, that is true. It is true.
Miranda is also funny. I mean, the whole origin of the T virus and Umbrella is funny because my one of my podcasting idols, Zoe from Friends from the Internet and Fast Karate, she was a big Resident Evil fan. Like wrote a lot of the speed facts on Game Facts for like 2 and 3 and things like that. And she was always lamenting that the story of Resident Evil, each successive game would introduce a new inventor of the T virus, and that was sort of like the basis of the drama.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, it's like it's just it's the same as it's always been.
Perpetuating, yeah. I guess was it the only way? Was Miranda the only way to tie the whole series together?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I would have been fine with just scientists trying to create super soldiers or whatever has always
Yeah.
been. But it's kind of interesting, I guess. I don't know.
And I guess the sub question of that would be, or the follow up would be, does the whole series need to be tied together?
Right. Yes. I think
Of
that's
course.
that's one of the ultimate questions.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so she's dead. Yeah, I don't know what else I could say, but I can totally get I don't know if you're joking or not, but the child custody, I mean, if you see the parallels between, yeah, why isn't, my daughter versus your daughter?
Right. I just think that it's, if they had pushed on it a little bit more, I could take it more seriously. But I think it feels almost accidental, and it surely isn't. But I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah. Okay, well, we will move on to the four houses and the lords of those houses. And throughout, we'll just talk about organization, setting, atmosphere, and gameplay. And we'll go in order. So we'll talk, of course. Here's Lady D with her three daughters. There are so many pictures that I could have used, certainly. So, and there's so much fan art. So, they did not know that there would be a huge, I don't know, many bloody noses, if people are fans of anime, over this woman, and just going gaga over her, fetish or not, just like, who is this woman? So they were so like, they're overjoyed, but also confused. So actually my first question is, do you think that they did a disservice to this character as well as maybe the players? I use the word orchestrating, but using her early and having it relatively short.
Yeah, I know. I was pretty surprised by that. The chase sequence I thought would be a lot longer. So I don't know. I mean, when it comes to the greater plot, I mean, she is a supporting role. And I don't think she's any more sort of unique or compelling than the other lords. Certainly personally, I think she's the most interesting, but to the game itself, I think that I'm glad that after the internet reacted and the producers realized what they had on their hands, they didn't go back and make her a bigger part of the game. They kept it as is. I think that speaks to a certain integrity, that they didn't try to ride their prize horse all the way to market or whatever.
Yeah, I don't think she could have been, given her story, the alpha, I guess, of the first of the lords. But there was an interesting dynamic between her and Heisenberg. Like, those two are the most, I think, competent.
Yeah.
And so I suppose it makes sense organizationally that you have those bracketing the whole story. But I almost wish that she would have been either used, more or longer. But yeah, I mean, she's an, I don't know what to say. I mean, I don't have this particular fetish, but I will say that she's like really intriguing stylistically. Like, I love her wardrobe, and I took a picture at one point. If you follow me on Twitter, you can probably see the screenshot at Batgirl Oracle. But like, she has the exact same wardrobe hanging up somewhere. I'm like, that's apparently all she wears. And yeah, just with her daughters, which you find out, which this was a question that we had earlier on, what role should files and those sorts of things play, because those aren't her biological children, but she experimented on them, which is almost like I guess, pay it forward, because she was experimented on, and then these women, and she wasn't always this tall. So that was something else you learned from the files. And she dwarfs Mr. X and Nemesis, which is hilarious. Yeah. But yeah, I wish I would have had more experience with her. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't like being chased around. That makes me nervous. But she was just an intriguing character. I liked her style and the beauty of the setting too. It's such a short time. Like I said, I think more or less 90 minutes. And then you compare it to, I guess I can try to find where I was. So that beauty versus the factory, and it just seems like the factory is interminable. And at one point Ethan gets shoved down, and he's because you made it to the peak of the factory, and then he gets pushed down and he survives somehow, but now we know. And he looks up and he says, like, not again, or like, you've got to be kidding me, because he knows that he has to do it all over again. So that's unfortunate. Just like they're able to meld the beauty with the horror. And I would almost love to experience that longer, this unsettling beauty versus, oh, this is really ugly and it's also horrific. But
yeah, because if you're in this sort of industrial setting, it's expected, I guess, almost. So there's something perverse about something so beautiful. And there might also be a sort of like subconscious fear of women thing going on that stretches back to, this whole sequence is pretty impressive because it's also like when the first trailers for this game came out, it was kind of shocking because of the fantasy elements and because of this character, that like, how is this a Resident Evil game? Like, it just seems so different. And while she's not the most fantastical character in terms of like, she's not like animating dolls or whatever, she is kind of the greatest departure in terms of that aesthetic, because she, like, it's as somebody pointed out online, it recalls the original Dracula novel, The Wives of Dracula, and that this is very much about vampires. I mean, Ethan keeps calling them witches, which I think he thinks is a hilarious pun, but they're vampires. They drink blood out of wine glasses, and it's cool how the backstory was able to sort of like just engineer this, or basically adapt this aesthetic and make it in line with Resident Evil. I think that's cool.
Yeah, and I mean, there is a sensuality with vampires.
Yeah.
So that it totally plays on that for sure.
And a sadomasochism, because there's also beneath the beautiful mansion or castle is the cellar, which is another, which is more like the industrial space. It's creepier, and there's a lot of torture implements.
Yes, and you find out that they drain people's blood. There's one section you're like going through the cellar and it's filled with blood. You're like wading in it, and then vampires are popping out of the wading. You gotta take them down. It's crazy.
Who were those vampires?
Who were they? Yeah, that was interesting because I saw something that I was doing right before we started recording, that the vampires they're like female, they didn't say minions, but like the people that were working.
Oh.
And I thought, oh, how did you get that? I didn't get that at all. I just thought they were, but maybe that makes sense because if they messed up, they were always brought down there. But I thought they were brought down to be drained and like dismembered. So I don't know how that person got there, and I can't remember now where it was, but I thought, well, I guess that makes sense of where those people may have come from.
You could even sort of just put it together in your head. Like, I think like in The Descent, the movie, where they don't say what the monster is, but you can sort of figure it out. And I think that's cool when you have the riffraff, the most basic enemy types, they have a backstory and a context as well, which is kind of scary in this case.
Yeah. I'm thinking now, just we've gotten on this topic of motherhood, and it seems to be a theme that's kind of dragging through. Like, she wants to have these daughters. Mother Miranda is the one that helps her out with that. And Mia, of course, as a mother. And then I think about just how beautiful Lady D is compared to Marguerite Baker. I think her name was Marguerite, and how horrifying she was. And also that boss battle was so gross because like I don't know, her uterus is like, it's so gross. But just like, that's interesting. I wonder what the thought process is of like family and motherhood, and the differences between them, whether you're, I don't know.
This is a game for Vin Diesel because I heard he loves family.
Oh, you're right, he does.
I think if we were crasser, or if this was 10 years ago, we would sort of conjecture about the people who made this game and their sort of limited experience with women or families, but we're not going to do
that. No, we're not. I was trying to think if they are they stuck in sort of a societal or cultural idea that women can only be mothers?
Right. Yeah.
But well, I don't know who the creators are compared to, Jill and Let me think about Jill. Jill, I would say yes, because Claire, even though she's my favorite, she does, you got Sherry Birkin in the end, and it
Right.
does seem like she's kind of taken on like this proto motherhood.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know. That was just a pop. I did not form that thought well, because that just popped up in my brain. So
I know this is a tricky one. I mean, Leon also had an escort similar to that. I forget what
that's
her name
right.
was. But
Oh
yeah, in four.
yeah. I can't remember. I know that she's like annoying, or people
Yeah.
get annoyed by her. So here's hoping if they remake that one again, that they will learn from their mistakes.
Yes.
Okay, do you want to move on to the next Lord?
Well, I had one note here
Oh,
that was
please.
just what makes her different in terms of
Mm.
like the folderol. Because like, what was your reaction to the when Lady D broke wide on the internet?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and yeah, they used it's so it boggles the mind that they didn't know there'd be this sort of reaction, because she's like the centerpiece of their teaser.
Yeah.
What was my reaction? To be crass, which I
Please
said this to
do.
you, but I'll be crass here. I was like, good Lord, the size of those tatas. Um, but she is really intriguing. I don't know, and I don't think it's like an erotic sentiment that I'm putting forward, but it's just like, part of me is thinking, oh, she kind of has like a flapper-ish style to, or
Yeah.
maybe not exactly, but yeah, there's just like this movie, um like old school Hollywood style to her that I really like, and the fact that she has to bend down through her own doors to move through, and how she moves, like that is so particular, and this was motion cap, so I'm just like applauding the actress, just her mannerisms, her hand gestures. She's a fancy lady. She seems very, which is interesting, because how did this fancy lady live in that? Well, I guess this is her castle, but it's just really interesting to think about her compared to like these peasants that are just down
Right.
the hill. But I suppose that's just the nature of some of these villages, that you would have a lord, or something like that, with peasants next door. So I'm intrigued of what her backstory is with her family, and all of that, but they have like a coat of arms and all of that stuff. So that was, I just feel like I verbally vomited, but those were all of my reactions. But the first one was definitely like, good Lord, the size of those tacos.
I really appreciate the flapper reference, because I think that we mentioned Dracula. It's kind of an inversion in terms of like Dracula was this sort of Eastern European foreigner who was in London, and so he sort of clashes with the surroundings. But she almost just speaks that sort of like pre-World War II American in this sort of Eastern European setting. So I think that's, I don't know, maybe that was conscious on their part too. But yeah, Lady D is definitely the breakout character for this game. She became an internet sensation, and
Yeah.
It really sort of unmasked a lot of people who really just want to be stepped on by tall ladies, and they were out and proud about it. And it was pretty funny. But of course, if you look on even Wikipedia, you'll see that the action was mixed, because everything will be. Some people say that, like, the whole step on me thing is making light of sexual violence. It's not really consensual BDSM. And, Lady D isn't really interested in consensual BDSM, but it is a fantasy game where you can sort of read these things into it. And there's been a lot of fan fiction. It's been a lot of pornography. It was fun. She was definitely the main character of the internet for a little while.
Absolutely, yeah. People saying, "I'll run into her arms." I'm like, I no. I mean, I got killed by her, but I was trying to run away for sure.
Yeah.
Um, I did try to explain to my mother like this whole thing. She was a bit boggled. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know.
Well, there's a lot that makes her interesting and intriguing, as you say. I mean, there's the style, there's just the fact that she is very tall, and you don't really see that, because Oh, and also somebody had mentioned that it's like it's cool that she is sort of a mother and she's not just
Mm-hmm.
another young character, and that's pretty interesting too. And for my part, I've recently been following this actress in some K dramas who's taller than average, and she talks about how she has a hard time finding roles because people aren't as interested in her because she's not tiny. And I think that that's kind of hard. And so it's not so much that Lady D is going to be a trailblazer for representation, but it's sort of like a reflection of maybe it's different, and that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. And the actress herself is 6 feet tall, I believe.
Right, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. So at least there was some representation there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that voice, my God, just
Yes.
wonderful.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. So I would say top character for me,
I
anyways. I think
I
so.
would I would say so.
Yes.
Yes. Number
I
two,
think, yes.
Ethan Winters.
Oh, okay. Gonna kick you from the call now.
No.
I don't want to contradict myself though, because I did say that I think the most like intriguing voice act or like acting was Heisenberg. So I do want to at
Right.
least say that. I know that it seemed like I was contradicting myself. Okay, you want to move on to Donna and Angie?
If we must.
If we must, if I can find. There we go.
Woo.
Okay. Donna Beneviento and her doll Angie. I will say that I knew or understood the least about this particular character.
Mm-hmm.
Donna has some sort of facial disfiguration, and that weird thing that they put inside of people. Now I've forgotten what that thing was called.
Oh, it's like the K-Do or something like that.
Yeah. She uses part of that to basically have these dolls live and interact with her. I think she troubling childhood and didn't have many friends and things like that. And also there's this flower. It's either the flower itself or she uses her powers for the flower to create this hallucinogenic state for people, which explains some of the situations that Ethan gets into, because when he's in that house, he sees Mia and Rose walking around. Mm-hmm. And then once he leaves, he's A-okay. But this was probably the most horrifying gaming experience I've ever experienced. You lose your weapons right away, like the lights go off and then they go on and you don't have anything. He's like, what? And yes, we'll talk about the baby. You mentioned PT earlier. That's what I felt like I was experiencing, and I never wanted to play PT, which you can't anymore. Apparently, it's like a rare gem.
Oh.
But you just have to figure out how to get out of the house. And we've got hallucinations, and then you have this ginormous baby fetus thing that's got a placenta trail, and it comes after you, and it'll shove you in its mouth if you get caught, because that's the run and hide thing. And then the end, the boss battle itself is just you finding Angie in 3 different hiding places and stabbing her. And so it's a bit of a lackluster, is like very anticlimactic, but the whole thing was like, oh man, this is probably what Resident Evil, it's classic, would have felt like. And so I was experiencing that and shaking at the same time. But I feel like, again, just the organization, because you go off of a nerve-wracking experience with Lady D following you everywhere. And then this is like hyper intense. And then we'll get to the next one. But I feel like, I don't know, they up the ante and then they cut it off right away. And it was weird. That organization was weird. I don't know where I would have put this. I don't know if I would have put it before Lady D. But yeah, I mean, of what you've seen, you said, did you skip this section?
I think I saw most of it.
Okay. I mean, what are your thoughts, I guess, on the atmosphere, what goes down?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's weird because it's a sort of it's a difficult setting to really name. It's not as specific as a Victorian castle or something like that. I keep saying Victorian. I don't think that's correct, but you know what I mean. And in this case, it's really just like a house, but it's so scary. And I think it's all it's the lighting. Much like with Dead Space, as you mentioned or at the beginning, it's just like that was a masterclass in lighting and sound design. And in this case, it's just really like it's just so eerie, and the way the light bounces off of the halls and the walls, it is very much like PT, which was probably the scariest thing I've ever seen. And this, like, you know, creepy doll, always creepy, and creepy baby, like it's just is a little too much, I think.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting the baby, like the doll. That was enough,
Yeah.
because you're like, is this doll gonna pop up? And there are dolls everywhere. And at one point, you go into this little closet, and a doll has a scissor, and you have to go get the scissor. And there's a Mia, a replicant. Let me get this correct. A human-sized doll, but replicated to no better English. It is positioned to replicate the death pose of fake Mia,
Oh.
which is very bizarre. And you're like searching in it. There are three different things. You're like finding different things. It's
Yeah.
all, it all comes together. Like the whole house is a big puzzle, and you have to go different places to get all the pieces to figure out the last thing. But I'm going up the stairs, and that baby comes. And
Mm.
then all you can do is turn around and run the other way and find a closet to hide in. And then it comes into the room, and it looks around, and it starts crying. And then it leaves, and you're following its little placenta tail, or placenta trail. And it does it again. It does it 3 times. The second time, I was trying to get into a closet, and I was not getting the button prompt for examine to close the
Yeah.
door, and I was freaking out. So then I dove under the bed. And then the third time, you can't hide. You have to trick it by going around a giant table, and then you have to go to an elevator, and you're like waiting for the elevator to come. It was horrifying. It was
Yeah.
horrifying. So I think that was successful. The story, trying to figure out more about her. I don't know if I missed something, but just that was poor. I think just I would have wanted a bit more explanation, but maybe they thought we wouldn't care about her. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't seem like, you know, canonically Miranda really cares about Donna because she's pretty
Yeah.
messed up. Not as intelligent as the others. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that baby is it's pretty laudable. And it just makes you wonder if the reviewers who said this game wasn't scary even saw that thing, because
Yeah.
they really tapped into like what is sort of terrifying about babies, which is a lot because babies are just they're little weird mutant creatures. And this one, I mean, it's essentially like halfway through Tetsuo's transformation in Akira, but he's also just got this like mouth that's sort of
Yes.
long, like a line, like a vertical line, which is just weird. And but the sounds are sort of barely modulated, just baby noises. So it's like they already know like that's just there's something probably psychological at play that it just sort of plays on our either sympathy or I don't even know, but
Yeah.
like that part's not mutated at all, but it still works, and it's just very it's a tour de force in horror, as
Yeah.
I might say.
And it would seem really random, but it's almost as if it's Rose, because I kept saying it was he, like I kept saying he was coming
Right.
after me, but really it's probably supposed to play on it as if
Yeah.
we're Rose, and Rose is coming after, because it does say daddy and all weird stuff. Whew.
So I think that actually you could put this sequence first because that's when it's really like I gotta find my daughter,
Yeah.
and so I think that would make more sense.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, we'll go to this little guy,
Oh.
Salvatore Moreau. And this is actually when Ethan did something really dumb that now it's popped up in my mind, because you can easily grab the piece of rose that Moreau has, but instead you like stand right there, and then Moreau turns around, or he Ethan may prompt him by saying something. I'm like, you could have just grabbed it and run and you would not have had any of these issues.
Yeah.
But he clearly, I called him a sycophant. I totally agree with that. Like he wants to do everything to please Miranda. Miranda, I think, is probably grossed out by him, doesn't really care about him. He is a gross individual. This is like part 2 of his stage. He normally wears like a cloak over him. At one point, he vomits this green sludge near Ethan, and Ethan doesn't even respond. I would be like, what is that? And back away and like, you're so gross. What's going on? And then he turns into a giant fish that you have to fight. And the gameplay here, I would say, is pretty actiony because he's just swimming around. And if you are on a floating dock of some sort and it's not secured, if it's that type of floating dock, then he comes by, he can kill you. And so it's basically a maze and you just have to find your way out of it and sink you have to find parts for a windmill, I think it was. And no, it was what are those called? Well, we'll just say windmill. And lower the water level, and then there's a boss battle and all of that. So we have a more actiony type of gameplay here. And then he's really focused on the science. Like you find I shouldn't say like, that's terrible, but you find his journal entries and he's the one that's been experimenting with the Cadeau or the Cadou. So he was helpful to Miranda in that sense that he was able to experiment and see whether the subjects were able to take it or not. But, what do you think about this character?
This guy feels more of like the classical Resident Evil boss because he's a big mutant thing. But that face is that's definitely pretty disturbing because it's bigger than it should be, and he looks quite sad. So would you say that they were trying to make him sort of pitiful in any way?
I think so. I would say of the 4, like I certainly felt some sympathy for him because he clearly wanted some love and just his transformation did not work out well. So it's not a face that a mother could love. Unfortunately for that poor guy. So I did feel bad for him, and he was just doing everything he could to please Mother Miranda. So yeah.
Also the name Moreau, I mean, I guess that's sort of like the island of Dr. Moreau, something there.
Yeah, it does play off of that. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it certainly worked.
Ew.
Yeah. I don't have too much to say about him. It was more of like a run and survive situation. It reminds me of, I don't know if you played Batman Arkham Asylum, but the Killer Croc section when you're in the sewers and you have to tiptoe so that he doesn't know that you're there, or if you run then he'll come up after you. So it almost reminded me of that. You're very cautious.
Was it a difficult sequence because it was so different?
That's interesting. The maze, I suppose, was a bit difficult, but other than that, I know, especially because there aren't any other enemies that are coming after you. It's just him, and you just avoid him by looking where he is or when he has passed you, and then you run across. So not too terrible, I would say.
Okay. You just got to look at him, and that's the hardest part.
Yeah, that is true. Poor guy. Oh, look at the little fish. You should be. He would be related to you.
This if I was anybody in this game, it would be him.
Oh boy. Okay, and then our last guy is Heisenberg, or as I like to call him, the Big Lebowski. I've not seen anyone else call him that, so I feel like I could trademark it because I've called him that from the very beginning. But he's really interesting. He has powers that I thought they were telekinetic powers, but I guess it's more so, which I only figured out through the files, has to do with a type of like not static electricity, but some sort. He's basically like Magneto, but he's really only dealing with metal, which is why the tank that used to fight him is some sort of composite that Chris helpfully tells us is a composite material.
Mhm.
But you think that he is in thrall with Mother Miranda, but then you find out actually no, he really resents her and the experimentations and really wants to take her down. And Ethan could have helped him, but decides not to. I did like that there's almost a ring composition with this story because you actually encounter him first. He's the one
Mhm.
that gets first dibs with Ethan and has you run that gauntlet, which is, I guess, gameplay that you don't really, you said you didn't really like, which I died. I couldn't figure out how to get past that one trap until
Yeah.
I found the little niche. And then he's the last guy that you have as well. He's competent like Lady D, and he's pretty powerful and a compelling story. Yeah, and his design's pretty cool too, I would say, with his giant hammer there. So, any thoughts on this character?
I can't figure out like he seems so familiar like as soon as I saw him, and it wasn't just the dude. I feel like he's almost sort of alluding to like Solomon Kane or somebody like that with
Oh, interesting.
the hat, but I don't know,
Yeah.
it's not quite right.
Mm-hmm.
um so he's pretty interesting. I like that one of these characters does sort of break from the usual, just the villain trying to get you. That he has a plan, and he has his own agenda. I think that is pretty clever. But ultimately, he's got to go down. And just his environment is just like obviously we've outlined how it's different from
Mm-hmm.
the castle, but I do like it because it is that kind of marriage of other Resident Evil, like traditional Resident Evil, plus this new fantasy setting, because it's industrial, but it's also sort of like dated.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have these enemy types who are, you would call them cyborgs, but they're made out of like plane propellers. And I don't know if you saw, but the director of the movie Frankenstein's Army, which is actually pretty good, he was talking about how they ripped him off because the
Yeah.
boss Strum, it looks a lot like one of the characters in Frankenstein's Army, but so that could be a pending litigation.
Yeah, I actually just saw that when I was looking up a synopsis. I had scrolled down and seen that. Yeah, it's it also, I think, harkens back to classic Resident Evil, just that you've got these creations.
Yeah.
And as you're saying, yeah, he's using all sorts of parts and he's using them. He's trying to create this army or this perfect machine, perhaps, to take down Miranda, which is really interesting.
Yeah,
He's
I
also
like
the
that one.
one who gives us major exposition later in the game about, how this all came to be and what Miranda had done. Do you think that this is necessary? Did we need this because not everyone looks for the files and it's this is the time to do it?
Uh, I don't know, because it also depends on like who's giving the exposition and like why is it this guy. I guess it I don't know, maybe it kind of works because it is functional. The exposition doesn't just stand alone. He is trying to get you onto his side. But uh, I think it works actually. Now that I think about it.
Yeah. Uh, I was when I was playing, or I guess potentially when I was making these notes, I wondered whether it's good to have exposition so late in the game.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I one of the things that I keep coming back to is that it is a mystery story, and so
Mm-hmm.
I guess they're trying to withhold things. But if you're even asking this question, then I think that they didn't quite succeed, because you need to know just enough to know nothing. You can't just know nothing and then know everything all of a sudden, for sure.
Yeah. And Heisenberg, he pops in sometimes. So I feel like, wasn't there time or could the Duke have done
Yeah.
this?
Right.
Yeah, who could have? I don't know. I guess the villagers were not in the know. They only knew that Mother Miranda used to protect them and now these monsters are there and she's no longer. Why isn't she protecting us? So I don't know when it would have happened, but it would have been nice to at least know that this is what Mother Miranda has been doing. And then when you get to Heisenberg, find out this was not consent
Right.
because I did, yeah, these experimentations.
Yeah, that would have worked better.
Yeah. Mm-mm-mm. Okay. Anything else on any of the four lords?
It kind of seems like the this wasn't really how the bosses were structured in Resident Evil games. At least in 5, you just had sort of big monsters or characters we run into, like the Caterpillar.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, it seems like they're sort of drawing from Resident Evil 7's structure, where you had every member of the Baker family. It also kind of reminds me of like the way Far Cry games work after 3, where you have this small cast of characters who are all bosses. So I think that's kind of interesting, and it provides another opportunity for intriguing characters. And I think for the most part, they really did well in that department.
Yeah, and they're so distinct. I don't know how other Resident Evil games necessarily work, but with 2 and 3, and I'm so sorry I keep mentioning them, but they're it's all I have. With 2 and 3, you're basically fighting the same thing, but it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse because it's mutating. I mean, Nemesis, I think I fought him 3 or 4 different times. It's just in different modes. So yeah, this was interesting because you're fighting 5 completely different entities, and the tactics are different that you have to use, which is true, I guess, for Nemesis. You have to use different tactics. But it was interesting. You're not like, oh no, Nemesis again. You're like, oh, who is this? How am I gonna defeat this person?
I miss Nemesis.
Oh, yeah. Poor old guy. Okay. So we could just have Chris, what happens in the end, and then our final questions. But Chris here, and I found this one because he has a redesign. Do you feel like I'll start back by saying, did you feel like playing as him was a plot twist?
Mm-hmm. Right. I guess they've kind of been building towards that, and I would have been disappointed if Ethan was the only guy, because ever since the beginning of the announcement of Resident Evil 7, it was like, oh, are we sort of leaving behind all these legacy characters? So I'm glad that they sort of brought at least one back, and Chris is pretty central. I mean, he's the brother of Claire, and he's partners with Jill, and he's Leon's frenemy, I guess. So it makes sense, and I think it provides a sort of different type of gameplay than Ethan, even if it's essentially the same interface.
Yeah, I felt more comfortable certainly playing as Chris when you have like 500 bullets or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is lovely, and then there are all these weapon drops that you're finding.
Yeah.
I would say it's only a plot twist in the fact that when Ethan got killed, I thought he was killed. I thought, oh my gosh, that's the end. And now you're going to boss battle it out with Chris.
Yeah.
So I felt like it was a plot twist, at least to me. But then I wanted almost Ethan to be the one to take down Miranda, because I thought, man, you've been with him for 75% of this game. Is he not going to be the one to get his daughter back and defeat Miranda and all that? So I think they used Chris at a great time and then give it back to Ethan at a good time as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you like his redesign? People did not like his little mug in Resident Evil 7 when he popped up at the end in the bayou.
He looks a little off. I mean, he looks a lot different than he used to in 5 and 6, because he's been pretty consistent, I feel like. And this is a pretty radical departure. So I prefer his 8 model a lot better.
Yeah, he's a bulky guy. I mean, he punched a boulder. So I feel like he needs to be the one on the right rather than the one on the left. And then I think you have more experience with him than I do. So I can't really comment on this, but just his character, do you feel like it's in line with what you've seen before?
Yeah, I mean, he's a very moral, some would say boring character, but I don't know, I kind of like him. And it's funny because one of the DLCs for Resident Evil 7 was called Not a Hero, which I laughed at the first time I saw that, because I remember in the beginning of Resident Evil 6, what I saw of that game, he was in a bar, and one of his rookie team members came up to him, and he was trying to get him to do something. He was like, no, I'm drunk and PTSD. And now they're like, oh, he's darkened now. Like, he's seen too much. And then going into 7 and 8, it's like, oh my gosh, maybe he's turned to villainy.
Yeah.
But no, he's bad at explaining things to people.
I know. Even one of his fellow soldiers in the Wolfhound said, like, you should have explained to Ethan. He's like, I know I should. I'm like, oh yeah, that would have solved so many problems, sir.
Yeah. No, there's no time.
Do you think there would have been a fan outcry had he really been villainous?
I mean, that happens sometimes, right? I mean, when Captain America was part of Hydra, when I don't know, I thought there was another example in video games, but yeah, I think that people probably would have been upset because they've identified with him, and it's just like when Joel died, people get really attached.
Yeah. Well, shout out to our mutual boyfriend. It's like when Cassandra Cain was turned villainous as well. So,
I'm sure he took that well.
People have it. Oh boy, no, he did not. Okay. Well, we're wrapping up now. So we'll talk about the end. What do you think happened? Is Ethan dead?
I know, because we didn't see him actually die. It was a sort of Eisenstein suggestion, because in first person, he holds up the detonator, and then later we see the explosion. This is Resident Evil. So even if we saw him completely disintegrate in an explosion, I'd still say, I don't know, he could come back.
Yeah.
But we have that time jump that we'll talk about next. And so I think maybe it's possible. Maybe they finally decided that they've ran out of story to tell with Ethan.
Yeah. I think what I've learned from shows like Game of Thrones, or trying to think of anything else, is that if you don't see the dead body, there's still a chance that they could come back potentially. I mean, I thought this is the way to go out for him. He rescued his daughter. He's sacrificing for his family, and he's the hero in the end. And this is a nice little wrap up for him. So I would be fine if he were killed off, but I guess there's the potential for more. And we don't know. I mean, Mold seems to be really resilient. So even though his hand was a bit messed up, he's used to that. So
yeah.
Yeah. I forgot a question. Maybe I'll come back to that. Can you remind me to ask about continuity, I guess, canon endings? This was something that I wanted to talk about, and I completely forgot. I forgot to put that on our notes, so we can talk about that. But there is a post-credit scene with Rose. Rose is, there's no age given. She looked like she could be 18, maybe. I mean, she's an agent, 16. So hopefully she's an adult.
Oh, yeah.
And she is powerful. A joke was made. The agent called her Evelyn, and she took umbrage at that. But she seems to be really powerful somehow, which I have another point. Remind me to ask a question about Alien Prometheus, but it's really just called Prometheus. But I have a a connection with that.
Wow.
So she gets in the vehicle, and then they're driving, and I'm like, okay, goodbye. And then it stops, and there's a figure, and you're like, who is this figure? There's no way. So there was found on photo mod by Otis _INF. So I did cite my work. That was found on IGN that found that the character model used was Ethan. So they were somehow able to like zoom out and like, there he is with his dead looking eyes. So do you think it could be Ethan that pops up there, or are they just using that character, model, and no one was ever supposed to see it that way? What do you think?
Wow. I mean, I'm sure the developers anticipated the possibility for people to go into the game and find that model. So in that sense, I think he was used on purpose, but it might have just been for the purpose of creating ambiguity, like the ending of Blade Runner. Because what does it mean if it is Ethan? I suppose that's what we've been talking about, that he could come back. Obviously, I think we're both pretty resigned on the question of whether we want him back. Because it seems like, this could be a new start, and I'm fine transitioning to Rose as a main character, or just Chris or somebody. But it's also, this is a game where they had established hallucinations and things like that. So who knows?
And it's said that the father's story was done.
Right.
you know, at the end. So it seems like, what part could he play if it's Rose's story would be my question, unless you're playing as her and then she gets into some trouble and he pops up and helps her out. But I'm just thinking, why would I choose him to save her over Chris Redfield or something like that? So I don't know, except for reuniting and creating that family. I don't know how it would help to have him in Rose's story.
Right.
Going forward.
I thought it was interesting that she was really dedicated to him. She seems to go regularly and visit him. It's kind of because she never knew him really. So she was just told how awesome he was. And I wonder if that will play into sort of like the mythology of fatherhood, that it's really just about sacrifice and not actually being a father, because that's not what fatherhood is. I don't know, but it's, you know, he got his wish. He saved her.
Yeah.
Good guy.
Unless there's something, sort of supernatural, I guess, with the connection that they had.
Oh, really?
I don't know, with her being separated, and I don't know. And the mold. So my connection with Prometheus is, have you seen Prometheus?
Unfortunately, I've seen Prometheus.
It's not all that bad. I like
Numi.
What'd you say?
Yes, it is.
I like Numi Rapace?
Yeah.
Anyways,
I don't know.
So this is the connection. So if you recall, her beloved the infection was inside of him.
Yes.
And then they became pelvic affiliates. She became pregnant with the xenomorph. And instead of it being a chest burster, she had to undergo basically a C-section. Remember that? That was an intense scene. Great. Oh, yeah. It really was. It really was. But I wonder, is that how Rose was created? Because if he was a mold, like, yeah, I don't know. Did you think about that? Is it weird for me to think about that? If he were a mold, how was she conceived? And Mia knew all along. Mia knew that he was special, which was interesting, or knew all about him. I don't know. So I don't know what my question is, but.
So Mia wasn't pregnant before Ethan was infected?
Because 3 years passed after the Bayou.
Oh, right.
So okay, after they survived Louisiana, then she became impregnated, which I guess once they moved to the village. Yeah.
So yeah, because I immediately thought about like advanced aging, because I was like, would they really have put a significant time jump into the game series like this? Maybe there's another way to do that. So it's possible that she is. Well, I mean, she's definitely something in terms of like whether or not it's specifically a mold. She has that sort of supernatural power. So yeah, I guess it would just be that she was conceived, and she could be this sort of first, like the generation of zombies that was this she was created at birth or whatever. She wasn't infected. She was sort of born that way, like Lady Gaga.
Yes. Yeah, I guess so she's part mold. That was really how she was able to be separated in total canisters, I guess. So then I just wonder if there's like literally a piece of Ethan in her, and maybe that's why that connection is so strong. I don't know.
Yeah, that could be.
Maybe we'll find out. Maybe. Okay, I did forget to talk about canon. I also wanted to applaud the animation of the fairy tale. I really loved that. And I think it sets the stage for everything, because the 4 things that the little girl meets seem similar to the 4 lords, but I really liked it. It also reminded me of the Deathly Hallows, that story, and how they animated it. But did you like that animation style?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. Interesting. The invocation of a fairy tale sort of, it really does set a tone. And it immediately draws thematic attention to storytelling itself, which we've referenced every now and again, but I don't know the whole picture or the whole scope there, so I can't really say.
Yeah. And they saved the ending of that story until you beat the game, because you see that the father actually sacrificed himself, which would have been giving it away, foreshadowing. But I wonder if you could have gotten away with it and just shown it and seen what would have happened. Okay, the canon question, which I should have asked way earlier, is something that happens in RE7, where you are given a choice as a player to either save Mia or Zoe. That's her name. Yeah. And Zoe's been helping you throughout the game to find different things. And I personally picked Mia because I thought, well, she's my wife, even though she lied to me. And Zoe was just this other person. But some people choose Zoe. Unfortunately, Zoe, I think, dies no matter what. But if you don't save Mia, then you're just going home on your helicopter ride alone. But if you save Mia, you're separated, but then you see her in the end. So this is a question that I've just been thinking about in terms of gaming and as generations progress. People who chose Zoe, that choice is taken away from them in playing this game because Mia's alive. She survived. So I don't know if this is like too big of a question now, but do you think there should have been the option, or is it just too hard to craft that? Could they have had something in the beginning where, oh, Mia was found alive, just for those people that still had a save file? Is this too much? Is this too much to expect? Or is it something that maybe we could hope for future generations of games, that they do take, if there's a choice, you make that choice valued? And so if the players are, I'm just thinking of like Ghost of Tsushima, there's a huge choice at the end. And if there's a second one, I would love for my choice that I made at the end to carry on and have repercussions in the second one. Any thoughts on that? And I guess that's a huge question, but yeah.
You know, I really thought that player choice in that was also going to be trendy after Mass Effect, especially, but it seems to persist in strange ways, because this isn't the first time that you've had a reset after a canonical ending. I mean, Dishonored did that. You could, I think, the main character of the second Dishonored game could die in the first one. So obviously, you know, that had to be erased. And then I think one of the better examples is probably the new Wolfenstein games, where in the beginning, you have this choice between saving one of two characters who's about to be executed, and that carries into the sequel. So that's pretty interesting, because that's a lot of like voice acting that wouldn't be experienced by half the player base, but it's also narrative because it really makes you hate this, you know, Nazi guy who you probably would have hated anyway. But in this case, in Resident Evil Village, it's like, or Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, it's like that choice, it seems it's not quite the same, because why wouldn't you pick me? It's basically the same as the end of Far Cry 3, where you could choose to kill your own girlfriend for some reason. And like, why would anybody do that? So I don't know.
Yeah, that was I think I've seen a video of like, doesn't he then have like a sacrificial sex scene or something? And then he gets killed nonetheless.
Yeah.
Weird.
Oh boy, very weird.
But yeah, so that's it has to be Mia in order for this to work. But I just wonder if there's a way for that Zoe choice to pop up and, oh, Mia, we found Mia, da, da, da. I don't know. Even just like a little tagline, but maybe the future of gaming somehow. Okay, so final questions. One of them, how does this rank as a Resident Evil game for you?
You know, for all of its problematic aspects, I did really like 5, but I think it's just because it was a co-op game, and that was always my favorite part of video games, was couch co-op, and that's a surprisingly very good looking game for its time. Like, for whatever reason, every now and again on the 360, there'd just be these really gorgeous games that look good even now, like Halo 3, and this one seemed interesting, but it was definitely a different gameplay style than what I'm used to. So if I had been more, you know, Rocky, you know, training in the mountains, and I really went through the whole thing, and as you did, then maybe I could have arrived here more prepared. But I half knew what I was getting into. Like, there's a chance I don't finish this game, because that's what happens with most games in me, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I would say 2. It comes in second.
It comes in second. Okay. I liked this more than 7. but I think it's probably third in terms of the 4 games that I've played.
Yeah.
So I think maybe I would put 2 first and then 3. And 2 and 3, they just have replay value, which
Right.
I don't know if that was the intention of having them shorter, but I played 2 4 different times because there's an A and B path for each character. And I didn't feel like I was slogging through it or uninterested at all, even though it was well-trod territory and I could find things easily by the 4th time, but I enjoyed it. And I'm about to finish my second playthrough of 3 and I've been having fun. So I guess, yeah, I don't know. Whereas I sent it back to Gamefly. So I did not play the new game plus. I wonder what that would have been like to play with Ethan again. But it's just, I don't know. It's unappealing to think, oh, I've got to be with him for 10 more
I
hours,
know.
to be honest. So even,
Yeah.
Trophy Hunter, I'd be like, I don't think so. I can't do it.
If only you could turn off his commentary, that would be nice.
Oh, yeah, it's very true.
Yeah.
Well, you had the last bunch of questions here about what does Resident Evil mean to you. So do you want to take the lead on that?
Yeah, I think this will be my final question because we could sort of talked about like the influences of this game, but what does Resident Evil mean to you? As I've written here, let's see. I don't know if I just want to say all this. We've seen the American movies. You've played the remakes. This is a notoriously strange series, constantly reinventing itself. But now with the remakes and direct continuity and tone between 7 and 8 is a singular shape emerging. Will there be space in the future for weird Matrix Kung Fu or Alice clones? The strangeness of 8 indicates it's a possibility that we haven't lost its heart, but I don't know what is the essence of Resident Evil to you?
Yeah, that's funny that you just boiled it down like that because I in my bullet points I was like, what would you say defines a Resident Evil game for sure?
Yeah.
For me, there's always science involved.
Yeah.
And I think there does need to be some sort of virus. So when we had werewolves and vampires are great, but I thought, how does this connect
Yeah.
to bioweapons and all of that stuff? So I think that needs to, I would like it to be there. I guess it shouldn't need to, but that's what defines a Resident Evil game for me. And I think Joe Schmo antagonists are fine, not antagonists, protagonists are fine because I think now Claire is Joe Schmo. She's just looking for her brother. She has no training, but she's doing okay. And I think it still needs to have a melding of horror and action. I don't think we can I think you were probably being tongue in cheek there with weird Matrix Kung Fu or Alice clones. But I feel like once you get to just complete action and there's no anticipatory dread or just straight out horror, I think you've lost what Resident Evil is so well known for and really is the mother of all of these horror action adventure just survival horror games that have bred off of it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I guess my problem with the way that this franchise works really is just the odd sort of storytelling, because my perception of it is always that you play 90% of the game inside this like tiny pocket of what's happening, and then the last 10% is that sort of Heisenberg style exposition dump where it's like, oh, this is what's happening. So in total you get that 10% each time, and eventually that adds up to 100, but you're still spending most of your time like poking at clocks and putting masks on statues, and that's not storytelling.
Yeah.
Or is it? Is that, to me, is that the essence of Resident Evil? And I don't know. I don't have enough experience with it, but I do like that Resident Evil is broad enough that it can contain, like, I don't know if you've seen that fight between Ada Wong and the president of a European country in Resident Evil Vendetta, I think it is, one of the CG animated movies. And there's all sorts of strange stuff, like Mr. X like battling liquors, and it looks like bullet time liquors and stuff, and it's dumb. But it's a game that can sort of do both. And the problem that I saw, not the problem, but the trend that I read into the remakes was that it was like sort of like narrowing the scope of what Resident Evil was supposed to be, that it was supposed to be more like Resident Evil 4. than anything else. And I don't know, but 8 makes me think that they're still being weird, whereas 7 felt sort of leached of that sort of character that I was expecting, I think.
Yeah. So they don't like the remakes, just to understand what they don't like what the remakes have been doing in terms of puzzling, or
I honestly, I think it's just the gameplay that it was, or not, I don't think it's any particular element. It's just the idea of the remake project, I suppose. That it's sort of like taking something and like saying, but this is what it's supposed to be like. Suddenly that metatextual narrative enters in, and it does make me a little bit worried, but they're still doing this like strange experiment with first person. And so there's all sorts of different like, and multiplayer, there's constantly Resident Evil multiplayer that they keep trying to do. So no matter what you like, you can probably, there's a Resident Evil game for you.
Yeah, you can probably find it. It is interesting, I guess, when you bring up the topics of remakes versus this new line of things. It's almost as if our hearts, I guess, are being split. Like, which way do we go? I personally would prefer them to continue doing the remakes, if only because I want to experience the classics with beautiful graphics. And then they've had time to look back and reevaluate, so they could clean up, stories and things like that. But also I understand people wanting new things as well. With I don't know what the original one did, but did it have puzzling?
The Resident Evil 1?
Yeah.
I believe. I think there were some scarabs you had to put onto doors and things like that.
Okay. So we can't lose that, I suppose, if it's there in the beginning. Right. There has to be heightened danger to the puzzling, I suppose.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Well, is there anything else you would like to say about Resident Evil Village?
Yeah. I do feel bad that I wasn't that I couldn't finish the game. For some backstory, I've been struggling to move out of this apartment that I've been living in for the last 6 years. So I've accumulated a lot of stuff. And that's just hasn't left a lot of time for things. And so, but hopefully it created an interesting dynamic wherein you finished the game and I watched the game, because one of the things with The Last of Us was, how valuable is the experience of play itself? And a lot of people would sort of debate that. And so in the case of Resident Evil, like, I guess my question is like, is the experience of not playing it, but watching it, like, legitimate, do you think?
I'll say yes. Sorry, okay. I had to think. I'll say yes, but you just won't feel what I don't think that you felt what I felt when I was in Donna's house. So yes. I think that's the only thing, because you are basically where I am in comfort level of, I love to see my little player, so that there's the zombie, the character, and then me, rather than the zombie and then me. But you're there. That gives you, you're a degree removed, so that way you can feel some comfort. But I watched the DLC for RE7, or as much as I could only stomach so much, where I can't remember what the son's name was it was the cameraman, and it was basically a bunch of Saw business. It was too much, but I was just interested in, like, what's this poor cameraman? Does he survive? He doesn't. But it's just terrible. Well, he gets blown up in the actual game on a videotape. But yeah, so that was like totally enough for me, of like, I'm watching them play 21, and if they lose a hand, they're losing a finger. It's like, this is too much. But just, I think watching RE8, maybe for a good, I don't know. What do you think? 50 to 60%. I think you could get like, yeah, I get the whole feel of it, but it's like Donna's house and
Yeah.
maybe also the suspense of Lady D chasing after you that you really have to be able to play and feel that if you want to feel it. But if you want to stay removed from it, then do it. But I don't know if it's as cinematic as say Last of Us, because I
Right.
think that story isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
The story's not as compelling as other games. I think that it's definitely escapism for me. It's not superficial, but it's not like, oh man, let's really pull this apart. Look at all the symbolism. What does this mean? You know, I don't
Yeah.
see Resident Evil, and I don't want to offend anyone, but I don't know if that's the point of Resident Evil, to have this huge, we're trying to have some sort of commentary on something big, and we've brought some things up that, oh, could this be a commentary on, but I don't know if
Right.
that's the intention of it.
Right. Yeah. Whereas in The Last of Us, you would never ask that question, like, oh, are they trying to talk about like agency and fatherhood?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, yeah. Yeah. Resident Evil is funny that way, because it almost feels reckless in a sense, in terms of the way the story is rolled out, that it is in pieces and you never really feel like, well, in this case, at least, you don't feel like the main character in the story. You're just Ethan. But at the same time, like I look at a character like Strom, I think I would call him Strum, who's got this propeller, and it's just like there's a lot visually going on here, that I really like about it, and that's still what draws me to Resident
Mm-hmm.
Evil. And then, but I think that like the recklessness is kind of a symptom of that larger like unhinged creativity that, they are doing something different than The Last of Us, which is, more specific, and more deliberate about story. But there's not a lot to see other than the Rat King, of course, which comes late.
Yeah. You're very true. Yep. Well, I think that's it for me. Do you have anything else?
No, I think I'm good. Just feeling a little torn, but other than that, I think I'm probably good.
Okay. If you given the choice between another remake or continuing this story, which would you prefer?
I'd always go for story and sequel. Like I'm not too interested in prequels or I guess retreading, but I haven't tried the remakes, so I would like to. It's funny because I really want to play three just because I like Nemesis, but I'd probably have to start with two. But it would probably also just be too intense for me. If I couldn't handle the baby, could I handle Mr. X?
I think well, I think they're completely different. Mr. X is a a fellow that would get along with Lady D because he's fancy too. He's got a little top hat. So yeah. Well, I guess I retrod territory, and it's interesting because whenever they say that we're going to remake such and such, like they're remaking Gossip Girl, that sort of thing, I'm like, give me a break. We just had this, so I wonder if that's what Resident Evil fans are also thinking. But for the remakes, I mean, that's my first time with the Resident Evil, so for me, I love it, and I want to be able to play these on the newest console and experience them and fall in love with them as other people have. And so that's me, but that's also because I'm more interested in those particular characters than I am Ethan. So I'll give Rose a shot when she comes out, whatever her story may be. And hopefully we've seen her face. So I wonder if it'll be first person or third.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I would hope third. The first person thing was just an Ethan thing.
Yeah. I wonder if Resident Evil 9 will be like Control and she'll have those sorts of abilities.
Ooh, that'd be cool.
Like
that'd be like Alice.
Faden or whatever her name. Yeah, like Alice. Yeah, one of those Alices. Okay, well, do you want to represent Quinoa and say where you can be where you can be found, where people can support you?
Yes, this is a podcast that should not happen because technically we're in the middle of a feud. So call it a ceasefire. Because I am on the Treacherous Questions We Don't Have Answers podcast with our mutual boyfriend, Donovan Morgan Krantz. And since Donovan did such a good job explaining my CV last time, I guess I should say that he is also a writer of Batman materials, in that he covers Nightwing for the Batman universe frequently. And he is a proud bookseller at the old B&N down in Nashville. You go visit him, he'll give you some very curated recommendations. And he's a very cool guy. You know, he saved my dog from a house fire.
Wow.
He was my best man at my third wedding. He's a really good guy. I wish I could say that with a straight face. And our, our podcast is about social issues. And depending on when this goes up, we're probably going to be talking about Pride Month, which I suppose it is.
Ooh,
at the moment.
Yeah, it sure is.
Mm-hmm.
Where can you find that?
You can find us at qnoanswers.com. We're also on the iTunes store, and we're probably in Stella's mentions.
Unfortunately. Unfortunately. Okay. And where can they find you on the socials?
Oh, you can find me at Harrison Shoots, and just look for Taeon giving you the bird, which I can't actually do on this broadcast.
On this podcast. Well, I did say some bad words, so they'll probably have some. Yeah, I know. Well, just one. Okay. Well, I so appreciate you coming on and doing this with me. I kind of manipulated you into it. So,
well, I think we had been talking about this for a while.
Yeah.
And it was definitely a highlight of my year, but I just wish I was more prepared. But next time we certainly will be on the same page for whatever we do next.
We will. Are we still keeping that under wraps?
Yes.
Okay. And it'll be more uplifting.
Oh, absolutely.
And you're in charge of that. So
that's
I'm
right.
not worrying about that. Yeah, that's you. We're doing a crossover. Yep. Oh, I guess we're both in charge. We'll talk about it. About it. Okay. Well, people, remember, you can send any questions or comments to backrolltheoracle@gmail.com. Like the show on Facebook and Twitter, and follow it at Backroll the Oracle. You can also find the show on Google Play and Stitcher. Follow the Batman Universe on Facebook and Twitter as well. And of course, YouTube, which you might be watching right now. You can find Backroll the Oracle. Once again, thanks to Mile High Comics for sponsoring Backroll the Oracle, the Barbara Gordon podcast. Thank you, Harry, for not getting trod on. Thank you. Yeah. For not getting trod on by Lady D and being here with us today.
Mm-hmm. I know. I really didn't go into that, which is good, because it's just like you and Ethan, it just wouldn't have stopped. So
yeah. You never would have left. And until next time, which will be with our mutual boyfriend, Donovan Morgan Grant, where we cover Cass, the climactic fight between Cassandra Cain and Lady Shiva. Wow. Until then, fly on, Babs lovers, and Lady Dimitrescu lovers as well. Goodbye.